Yeah, and I believe Aaron Wiseman is on the phone. Dave Kimna did contact us and say he had a prior commitment.
Okay, we'll call this meeting of the Jefferson City Council Budget Committee to order. Ms. Donaldson, would you please call the roll?
Fitzwater.
Present.
Graham.
Here.
Hensley.
Present.
Hussey.
Here.
Kimna. Lester.
Here.
Schreiber.
Here.
Vogt.
Here.
Ward. Here. Wiseman.
Here.
Thank you. And the first item of business tonight is the mayor's presentation of her budget. Mayor Turgeon, thanks for being here tonight. And please proceed when you're ready.
Thank you. And I'm pleased to be here and present the mayor's budget this evening. And how is this one? Hello? Hello? Hello?
Here, trade me.
Oh, I hear it. Try this one. There it is.
Excuse me.
All right, and we'll have our hand sanitizer handy for that as well. So, welcome everyone, and I am pleased to present the mayor's approved budget this evening. And first want to acknowledge all of our hardworking employees at the city and recognize them for all they do to provide the services to the city. And I'm going to follow along here with the mayor's letter, which you all received in an email form, but I will summarize that this evening for you and for the listeners tonight. And as you know, this budget is only a plan, and it's very likely that it will change. And I know that bringing this budget forward, I always enjoy the process of working with council and listening to the input from council members and constituents. So we know that this will likely change moving forward. And I also want to take a moment to congratulate staff and City Council for receiving the Government Finance Officers Association Distinguished Budget Recognition Award for FY19 budget, and continuing to receive the GFOA recognition for the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. So always appreciate receiving those recognitions on behalf of the city. So some of the budget highlights are as follows here on page 1. The overall budget. So the overall budget for FY21 is $64 million, a decrease of 0.88% below the FY20 adopted budget. And as the city administrator and I have emphasized over the last several years, there are 3 specific areas of concern I have noted for which we are not keeping current in funding: personnel expenses, facilities maintenance, and the purchase of vehicles and equipment. Personnel services represent 79% of the general fund budgeted expenses and 55% of all funds budgeted expenses. Skipping down to revenues, and this is something that is listed in the mayor's letter, and Margie will go into a little more detail about. So going on to page 2, the bolded salary, wage, and salary adjustments. And this budget includes a 2% salary wage adjustment for all full-time employees except the city administrator and all part-time employees with benefits. And I think that's very important to keep up with our employees and having that 2%. And then there are no new positions recommended for approval in the mayor's budget. And then also it highlights the city's classification and compensation plan conducted in 2016 has not been fully implemented. And I know that's something that we definitely take seriously, the class and comp, and how we don't want to become behind or outdated in our budget, in our salary and wages, but I'm thankful that we do have a 2% here in the mayor's budget. And that next paragraph talks about that salaries are not funded at a level to implement a meaningful pay per performance or merit-based employee performance evaluation process that I wish was included in this and is not at this time. And then, speaking of the pay for performance, there is the 5% increase in personnel that I want to make sure that we are all on the same page about what merit may look like and whether some departments can or do give above and beyond the 2% that we already have allocated. So as we've discussed with the Finance Committee in the past and kind of going over to page 3, that is something that we would like to have some specific direction from the council on that particular item. And then the mayor's changes and additions, and I do want to back up here at this point and talk briefly about something that's not in the letter, but I did want to mention that I wanted to add that the Fraternal Order of Police gave a very good presentation at the last Public Safety Committee meeting and then also at last week's Finance Committee meeting. And so I believe all of council's been able to be there, and I know that information was also emailed out to city council members. President Bowman gave a great summary of information for council to think about and take into consideration, the importance of placing a priority on police officers and the salaries so that we remain competitive and that we retain the highest level and best police officers. So appreciate those presentations that were made, and it definitely gives us something to think about moving forward, and hopefully we can work together to come up with some potential solutions for the future. Back on page 3, the mayor's changes and additions. And at this time, I am adding funding for a total of 5 police vehicles. I recommend how to do that is reallocating the $55,000 that is set aside for JCTV to fund one of those police vehicles, with the remainder of that amount to go to equipment to live stream and record city council meetings by city staff. And I do want to take a moment to place some consideration on that. I know that we appreciate the partnership we've had with JCTV for many years. They've done a great job in live streaming our meetings and assisting to get our public access out. However, especially this year, I think it's brought to the forefront the importance of having a higher level of technology that allows us to stream our council meetings and be even more engaged as we move to a lot of virtual meetings and seeing the need to perhaps update equipment as well. I know, for example, even at the last council meeting, I received a few messages that our audio was not working, and we do have some outdated equipment that may need to be updated. So staff at this time is looking into what that would look like and what that equipment to live stream our meetings would be. As we know, we've tried to even do different things, live streaming on Facebook, which we cannot do under our current capabilities, and having the interaction from the constituents where they can participate in our meetings by not even being here. So all of those things that have come to the forefront, along with, I know the topic of funding and JCTV has come up in years past and what we can do, but this year seemed like really needed to be the time that we can no longer wait to update our equipment and move forward with that. So again, though, appreciate the continued relationship we've had with JCTV, but that is a consideration that I would put out to council in this budget, and that is one of the changes. Also, a very small change to shifting the $500 that had been allocated for Jefferson Day celebration to put towards the bicentennial instead for next year. And then the other large change was in the capital improvement sales tax fund. I recommend reallocating $120,000, the $120,000 for police field operating equipment and $20,000 for PD information systems improvement to fund 4 police vehicles. So if you look at your big sheet, you will see in section 3, there's one highlighted in green, which is the police vehicle. And then if you look to the very right of the next 4 police vehicles, you'll see a small asterisk to the very, very right of the dollar amount. And then if you look at the bottom of the column of section 3 on the big sheet, it says that the 4 police vehicles that were funded using sales tax G funds for a total of $140,000. So that's where that is highlighted. Other than that, really, those are the changes that I've made, and I appreciate City Administrator Kroll for giving me a budget that I felt very aligned with, and appreciate that, and those are the changes I've made. Some fiscal challenges for FY21 in the middle of page 3, and we know it's been a challenging year, first of all coming off of a tornado year and then coming right into a pandemic. So we know that first item that we've asked our department directors to decrease some of their operational budget line items whenever possible, and that those reductions are not operational in nature and should not materially impact service. The next bullet point, capital expenditures, that we face challenges for the city such as aged equipment and vehicles as well as aged and deferred maintenance for buildings. Going on to page 4, transit is definitely important to note in the transit item to keep the transit from making expenditures of service reductions, that we have recommended, or I have recommended, the use of $650,000 in the CARES grant funds that is available for transit. So that is highlighted in here, that next paragraph, that this is really the CARES grant funding totaling around $2.3 million to be utilized over the next 3 fiscal years to reduce the general fund subsidy is a temporary solution and a one-time in nature. So we're very thankful to have that CARES funding to balance that, but had that not been there, it would have been a significant challenge for transit. Going down in the letter, it talks about how we, in the past, had engaged a consultant for transit, and they made several recommendations, such as increasing fares, amending Handy Wheels ridership, and other recommendations that have been discussed but not done at this time. The next bullet point is the airport.
We better budget for a new microphone.
Okay, we get a new microphone in this budget. Okay, so airport is the next item, and talking about, of course, the new terminal. Also, that the FEMA disaster reimbursement no FEMA disaster reimbursements have been included in the airport funds revenues. Goes on to talk about the new airport terminal. Can you all hear me? Okay, pretty much. Okay. A little bit about debt financing bullet point. I'll just run through quickly. General fund, unreserved fund balance, that we are keeping that at a minimum of 17%. And then the last 2 points I will read. It is still uncertain at this time the effect that COVID-19 related expenditures will have on the general fund balance. COVID-19 related costs will be reflected in the FY20 revenues and expenditures and possible budget supplementals. Some line items might not be spent as normal in the FY20 budget due to COVID-19, in particular training and education. There might also be ongoing COVID-19 related costs that are not included in the mayor-approved FY21 budget that will impact the general fund balance. Also, it is still uncertain at this time the FEMA reimbursement for the 2019 tornado flood disaster. We will continue to provide information and work with FEMA to resolve any questions and issues. At this point, only 6 of the 15 approved FEMA projections have received reimbursement. Any FEMA reimbursement received will be deposited into the appropriate funds fund balance. So as we've come through a year that we faced a tornado and now a pandemic, I have no doubt that we will still be able to budget in a conservative way that we have. I appreciate council taking those items into consideration, as we know that although there's uncertainty, we still have been able to move forward and still provide a good level of service to our community. So with that, I would like to thank staff for their hard work in compiling this budget. Thank you, Ms. Miller and your staff, and appreciate all of our departments in the city working together for the success of the city. And I also want to thank our council members working so hard on this budget. I know it's a tough job to do, and appreciate that under the leadership of Councilman and Budget Chair, Councilman John Hensley. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, and then Margie will make her presentation.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Does anyone have any questions or comments for the mayor or her presentation? I'm sure we'll get into all of those issues highlighted there as this process unfolds. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Mueller?
Next, we'll move on to a PowerPoint presentation. You should have a printout at your desk for the mayor's approved budget. This is just a high-level look at the total budget and the general fund budget. So the total budget expenditures for all funds is a little over $64.6 million. You can see at the top, the general fund is the bulk of that at $32,845,000. And then we have the wastewater fund at a little over $12 million, and Parks and Rec at almost $9 million. The next page is the general fund budget. This is by department. And we will see some pie charts here in a minute that will illustrate where a lot of the funds are going to public safety. So speaking of pie charts, this is the total fund once again. This is by account classification. So this is not by department. This is by the type of spending. So across all funds, our personnel services represents a little over 55%. And then you can see the other slices of the pie. There's almost 11% for debt service. That's the wastewater fund and the parks bond. And then contractual services and so on. Our general fund expenditures by that same account classification, you'll notice that our personnel services are 79% of our total spending. The next biggest piece of the pie is contractual services, repairs and maintenance, materials and supplies, and so on. Here's the same look at the general fund budget expenditures, and this is by department. So you'll see all the little bitty slices of pie up on the top for those administrative and support services, the mayor and council, city clerk, city administrator, HR, finance, IT. The yellow slice of the pie starts with the police, and the little orange slice is animal control, and then fire is kind of the light blue at 24%. So as far as the general fund, over 58% of the budget is for the public safety area. The next biggest piece is the kind of green there, that's public works at a little over 6.1 million. And then planning and protective services is that almost 7% there in between. Moving to the total fund revenues, the sales tax represents 36% of total, fees and charges almost 31%, and you'll see a difference here between the general fund and total fund, mostly because of wastewater utility and the fees and charges that go along with that. Then franchise, utility tax, property tax, and other. The general fund revenues, sales tax is almost 39%. The franchise and utility tax is about 21%. Property tax almost 17%. Fees and charges less than 12%. And then other. And this slide is included just to give you some information about the property tax in the city and the breakdown between the city, county, and schools that add up to that total $5.77. And this is the example is based on a medium home listing price currently of about $166,500. So someone with a home in that price range would be paying a little over $1,800 in tax, and less than 10% would go to the city, about 12% goes to the county, and the schools then have the remaining almost 79%. So going along with that, you should also have a 2-page just budget highlights document. A lot of this is in the mayor's letter and in the information we just went over. Once again, the total mayor's approved budget across all funds is $64,610,654. $32,845,062 is the general fund. Wastewater is $12 million. And then we have parks at almost $9 million. The second item is the pay increase that the mayor presented. It is a 2% market maintenance increase. The total cost across all funds, including the salary increase and taxes and benefits, is $556,171. $419,418 is the general fund, and then you can see the breakdown of the remaining funds. The item 3, built into the budget, is a 1% increase for health insurance. No increase in the dental insurance. We have a rate hold from our provider. And the total cost of this 1% increase is $35,539. And you can see on the next page the breakdown between funds, with the bulk of that, almost $26,000, being the general fund. The logger's retirement rate changed this year for general employees from 12.2% to 12.8%. The police increased from 18.10% to 18.3%, or 30%. And fire increased from 47% to 48%. So the cost of those increases was $136,047, with $99,691 being the general fund. The mayor also mentioned in her presentation and in her letter that transit subsidy for FY21 is less than $580,000 from the general fund. And this is abnormally low compared to previous years because of the use of the CARES grant funds in the amount of $650,000. And that CARES grant fund, it totals around $2.3 billion, and our plan is to utilize it over the next 3 fiscal years to reduce the general fund subsidy in the transit program. The airport subsidy for FY21 is $79,000 from the general fund. This also is unusually low compared to previous years because of the use of airport terminal flood insurance proceeds in the amount of $170,000 to decrease the general fund subsidy for the airport. So the terminal insurance, the airport terminal's insurance, paid out $220,000. So $50,000 of it remains in the airport fund balance. Planned use is to upgrade the parking lot and parking lot lights once the new terminal is built. So $170,000 of the insurance proceeds was used to reduce the amount that is normally a general fund subsidy. And then the last bullet is the fund balance. We're estimated to end FY20 with the fund balance of 17.04%. With this FY21 mayor's approved budget, the estimate for the unreserved fund balance is 17.09%. So it's just slightly above the minimum required by our policy of 17%. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Councilman Grant?
Just for a quick sheet for myself, so what would that mean as far as in dollars above the 17%? Total dollars.
I believe your pink sheet summary, if you have,
I'm jumping ahead, but I just wanted to have that in the back of my mind.
you should have a printout of it at the very back of your book, Councilman Graham. And for those that didn't have books printed, there should be a sleeve that has those large sheets in it because it's very hard to read on your iPads. And if you will look at that first section, the one on the far left, the very bottom of that section, it will tell you that the amount needed for 17% is a little bit under 5.6 million. And then right above that shows the estimated FY21 ending of $5,612,182, and that is that 17.09%.
So then the difference is,
$28,521 above the minimum.
pretty tight. Any other questions or comments?
So, on the mayor's letter, she talks about the airport, no FEMA disaster-related reimbursements been included. Do we have any idea about the amount or timing of that?
Yes, we do. The FEMA reimbursements, there's about 15 projects that have been approved that we're working through the process. Only 6 of them have received reimbursement, and the majority of those are in the wastewater fund. We did get a small one for some city vehicles that were damaged. But we are still working through that process, and the airport does have several projects, the terminal being one, control tower being the other, and then the outbuildings there, the Pavitt building and the Hibernia Road building. So we are working with them. Most of those are staff time for cleanup and some materials and supplies.
Any other questions or comments? I'd like to move on to revenue.
Okay. So in your budget book, if you have a printed version, you would have had the mayor's letter in the front pocket, and then the printouts of the 5-year forecast that we'll be going over after revenues. And I just wanted to point out where they're at in the budget book. And then at the very back of the budget book is that sleeve with the pink sheet summaries, is what we refer to it. And those will have all a summarization of all of the pink sheets, the new items that departments requested. And it's broken up into personnel services, vehicles, equipment, and then basically other or miscellaneous. And in the past, we've color-coded these sheets to show in green those items that were funded by the mayor. And so the first page of the big sheets, you'll see that where the mayor had referred to the police vehicles. So there is one on this general fund summary page, funded in the general fund, and then there's asterisks by the next 4, because those are funded with using the capital improvement sales tax G funds, which does not have a sheet like this. And then the next page is for the airport, parking, transit, and wastewater, and you'll see some green funding under wastewater for those vehicles and equipment, and some replacements of HVAC and an interceptor sewer on Capitol Avenue that were funded. And all of this will be gone over in detail by the department directors. Just wanted to make you aware of where the summaries were at. And the last page is the Parks Fund and the items that were funded in their budget. So if we're ready, we can go on to revenues.
Anything else on these early topics from anyone? Nope. I think we're ready.
So and this is just general fund revenues that we're talking about tonight. So the sales and use tax, There is a 1% increase built into the budget, or I'm sorry, 1.5% increase built into the budget. That represents $178,111 increase over the previous year's budget. In the past couple of years, we've had a 2% increase built in, and not sure how revenues are going to continue to flow with the sales tax because of COVID. We thought we needed to be conservative and only put a 1.5% growth in there. Moving on to the next section of intergovernmental taxes, we've got a little bit of an increase on motor vehicle tax and gasoline tax, and about a $20,000 increase on the road and bridge tax, for that section being $33,500 above the 2020 adopted budget. Anytime that you have a question in particular about any of these lines, I have a lot of detail about how that estimate was derived. A lot of it has to do with historical spending and historical growth. Some of the ones that were affected by COVID, I've tried to do more of 1 year rolling average to get something a little bit more current, but they are estimates, so if you have any questions about how those were calculated, just let me know. The next section is other taxes, and that is actually one line. It's the cigarette tax, and that item has been trending down historically, so it has a $6,000 decrease. The next section is the franchise and utility tax, and Finance Committee has heard this from me before. A lot of the issue that we have being under budget in the current year is the telephone cell utility tax. And if you'll remember, that's the one that had the cities suing the phone companies for not interpreting what's subject to the tax. And it did go through the Missouri Supreme Court, and cities did win the case. But we're now working with an independent counsel to try to get voluntary compliance. But based on the revenues that we have seen, that one line item has been budgeted at $1.6 million compared to the $1.8 million in 2020. So that $200,000 reduction in the estimate pretty much wipes out the increase that we have projected for the sales tax. We are also seeing a decrease in our electric utility tax, which normally is weather-based, so hopefully that will kind of creep up a little bit for the current year, but based on 2-year rolling average, we're predicting a $100,000 reduction in that budget line. So for that section, there is $380,000 budgeted under the 2020 budget.
I have a question just for clarification on the telephone cell utility tax. The 1.6 that's budgeted, is that money that we are confidently anticipating receiving, or is that the subject of this collection effort?
Well, if you'll look, the FY19 actual was $1,629,000.
Okay.
So it is a conservative estimate, and it should not, we shouldn't have any problem reaching that projection.
Okay. So then is it a matter of getting compliance on a separate pot of money that is the effort of the collection effort, or?
So, last year, there has been an ongoing court battle it's about 2012, about how to interpret these types of taxes. And a group of cities litigated the issue for about 7 years and won their case in the Missouri Supreme Court, essentially saying they have to report all their revenue as general revenue for purposes of figuring out the amount of tax. And so that case involved landline providers, okay? And the city some time ago settled with its primary landline provider on how to interpret tax, part of class actions in the late 2000s. However, what the city is trying to do now, and what we're trying to do through our engagement with special counsel, is to take the case law that applied to the local landline telephone providers and also apply that to the cellular providers, saying they have to report all the revenues for purposes of taxation, whereas what they have been, the cellular telephone companies have been attempting to do is to underreport certain types of revenues as non-taxable revenues. And so currently what we're trying to do is convince the cellular companies to report their revenue in a manner consistent with the recent Supreme Court case law on a voluntary basis. And if we can't convince them to do so on a voluntary basis, then there could be an option of once again entering into litigation to enforce the newer case law in Missouri on how to interpret these types of taxes.
So the 1.6 that's projected here, it is primarily or entirely from the landline provider?
I wouldn't say it's entirely from the landline provider. It's primarily the cellular companies that have been creeping downward. So I would say that the landline is fairly flat, if not somewhat downward, just because less people are having landlines nowadays. But the cellular tax revenue is steeply declining because of the attempts to move away, and I say hide revenue. I don't know if that's fair, but allocate their revenue into non-taxable things. So it's not that they're not paying tax. We just don't think they're paying enough tax.
Okay, so if we inspired voluntary compliance at either a higher level or inspired new cell providers to comply, the amount brought in, we would expect to exceed what's currently projected.
Yes.
Is that correct? Do we have any idea of an estimate on that additional amount?
I don't think we do have an estimate on that additional amount.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to the next section, the property taxes. The current property tax line is estimated to be about $85,000 over the 2020 budget. That's based on a 2-year rolling average and a 1-year rolling average. And then overall, that section is about $95,000 over the current year's budget. The intergovernmental section, this is where we take in grant money. We do not budget for grants until we have actually accepted the grant. The next page, page 17 of your budget book, the charges for services section. This doesn't have a lot of changes from the previous year's budget. There's a couple of line items, the parts and labor chargebacks that are a little bit decreased, but then we've got some increases a little bit further down for rent on tower sites and the Cole County 911 reimbursement. That Cole County 911 reimbursement is based on 25% of the total 911 department's expenses. So the total for that section, charges for services, is about $22,000 less than the 2020 budget. Moving on to the fees, licenses, and permits. You'll see there's quite a few lines in there. As far as the ones that had significant or any kind of change, the building construction fees, we've got about a $40,000 increase built in on top of the 2020 current budget of $260,000, so going to $300,000. You can see the FY19 actual was $358,000. So we've budgeted an increase there. A little bit further down, there's the animal redemption fees. We had a pretty significant increase in the fees for adopting animals last year, and and so we had an estimate built in there, not knowing, what the activity would be or how much that possibly would increase the budget. So we've kind of ratcheted that down a little bit just based on historical over the last year with that new increase. So overall for that section is about a $35,000 increase in budget over the FY20 budget. So moving on to the next page, page 18, it's fines and forfeitures. We've got some significant downward projections in this section based on some averages in our historical, starting with court costs. We've estimated the 2021 budget to be $57,000. That's $12,000 lower than the 2020 budget. And then toward the end of that section, the court fines, the traffic fines, the budget is estimated at $500,000 for 2021. The 2020 budget is $630,000. So that's $130,000 less than the current year's budget. This has been trending down over the years, and this $500,000 is based on a one-year rolling average. So that section is about $158,700 budgeted less for 2020 than 2021. The next section is contributions and donations. We've got a small amount in there for animal shelter donations that we've really never budgeted before, but we've just accepted those donations, and so based on what we've seen over the last several years, we put a conservative $15,000 budget there. The biggest piece of this section is the street repair solid waste. This is contractual with Allied or Republic as part of the contract that was signed in 2016. There's a section that outlines charges for damages to roads, and it does have an increase every year, maxed out at 3%, and it's based on CPI. So that increase is almost $10,000 over the 2020 budget. Moving on to other operating revenues. We just have a line for miscellaneous, and this is based on historical. It's a 3-year rolling average, but we've also got a couple of new things in here. The $10,000 for rave from the county, $900 for Crime Stoppers from the county, and $2,441 for Tyler Tech from the county are included in this miscellaneous budget. So the increase over 2020 budget for this line item is about $31,000. The total for that section is about $30,000 over 2020 budget. The interest income is on page 19. It's showing a reduction from the previous 2020 budget of about $160,000 down to $120,000, and that's the result of our fund balance decrease. The other non-operating revenues, we've got sale of assets, and this is not changed from the 2020 budget. It's about $55,000. These are surplus items that we sell. And then the transfers section is the transfer from the lodging tax. This is the administrative amount that we retain for collecting the lodging tax and forwarding that to the Convention and Visitors Bureau and the Chamber. So the total revenues for the general fund before any kind of grants are the $31,969,791, which is $231,039 less than the 2020 budget. Now, the grants that we're going to be talking about are those that I would portray as a sure thing. So these are not just grants that we think we might be able to go out and get and apply for. These are grants that we receive on an ongoing basis. So the first section is our Entitlement Grant, working with Sonny Sanders and the Planning and Protective Services staff. That's budgeted at $300,332, which is quite a bit more than the previous year's budget. For the most part, I believe it's more salaries being charged to the CDBG grant. Moving on to page 20. The school resource officers. We have an agreement with the Jeff City Police or Public School District, and so 50% of our total school resource officers' department expenditures are billed to the school, and that total for FY21 is the $351,277, which represents $21,454 more than the 2020 current budget. The next section, the Mustang Grant, the only thing we have budgeted there is the amount for a DEA vehicle. And then moving on to page 21, the Mpo Grant. This is based on the budget submitted to MoDOT. So for FY21, it's $187,964, which is about $42,000 more than the FY20 grant. The next section, the Planning and Protective Services Redevelopment / grant. That $20,500 is also related to our Allied or Republic Services contract that states that $6,000 annually and $9,000 for hazardous household waste and $9,000 annually for recycling, education, and promotion. And then it also includes $5,500 from Cole County for the hazardous household waste ongoing. So the total revenue for the general fund is estimated for FY21 at $32,845,061.69. That represents a reduction from FY20 current budget of $85,419.39, which is 0.26%. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments at this point? So before we get into in our following meetings, individual spending items, we will need to adopt a revenue projection, and not necessarily tonight, though we certainly could take it up tonight if we were ready to. But this, the presentation you just provided reflects your best estimates and your professional judgment as to at least a conservative approach of projected revenues for the next fiscal year.
That's correct, and you are correct. In the last few budget cycles, there has been an adoption of the revenues as kind of the starting point for the further discussions.
Okay. Well, we'd entertain a motion on that this evening, if anyone was ready, or we could take it up at a future meeting. Any comments or questions or motions at this point?
How do we move that we adopt this number that has been presented to us as our anticipated revenue?
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any other council discussion on the topic? Seeing none, Ms. Donaldson, would you call the roll, please?
Fitzwater,
Aye.
Graham,
Aye.
Hensley,
Aye.
Hussey,
Aye.
Kimna, Lester,
Aye.
Schreiber, Vogt,
Aye.
Ward, Wiseman.
All right. Thank you very much. We've adopted the revenue projections according to Ms. Mueller's revenue presentation this evening. Thanks very much for that. Very helpful.
Thank you.
So the next item on the agenda is the 5-year financial plan.
And for those that have the printed budget book, it is in the front pocket. And for those that were going to rely on their iPads, we did print these and put it in a sleeve for you because the numbers are very, very hard to read with the large page being shrunk down on the iPad. So as part of our financial policies, we prepare a 5-year forecast, and that's what I'm going to be presenting tonight. The first page of the projections is the general fund 5-year forecast with a 4% projected unexpended built in. This is based on history. So we all know that you approve a budget, and the department directors pay very close attention to that budget and are very conservative. And so for most years, there is a certain percentage of the budgeted amount for the expenditures that is not spent. And the very last page in this grouping is a regular sized piece of paper, and that has the analysis of that unexpended budgeted expenditures over the last 7 years. So you can see starting with 2013 that there was over 6% variance. And then down 2019, it was 2.57%. And of course, we all know the reason for that is the amount that we expended for the tornado and flood. So we did not increase our budget to make those expenditures. We used existing budget authority. But that is why there's such a big reduction in the amount that was unexpended. So looking at those ranges, the smallest variance was 2019 with the 2.57%. The largest variance was in 2015 with 6.28%. You can see the median variance then is 5.65%. And then you've got some different numbers of years averages, ranging from 4.85 or 5.04 down to 4.25%. So what this projection, this 5-year forecast, is based on a conservative 4% unexpended. So if you look in the middle of about middle of the sheet is our 2020 adopted of $32.9 million. You'll see in the expenditure section the 32.9, but also almost 1.6 million added to that for those amounts that are reappropriated. So basically, projects that had been started in FY19 that hadn't been fully paid yet were reappropriated to 2020. And then that 1.3% is that 4% projected unexpended. So 2020, we're estimating using almost $253,000 of the fund balance to balance our budget. But that still is 6.9% or 6.9 million remaining unrestricted fund balance at the end of 2020, which represents 21% of the fund balance. So the 2021 column right next to it is the mayor's proposed budget. So the $32.8 million in revenues and expenditures, and then 1.3 million in projected unexpended. So moving on, we've got the 2022 projected still being well above the 17% minimum, and the 2023 projected being that 19%. What you'll notice in 2024 is the big difference there is that is when the CARES grant for the transit runs out. And so we'll have a huge increase then in the transit subsidy. So if you're looking in the middle of the page, the total expenditures, the total expenditures are bolded. 2 lines up from that is the transit subsidy. So we go from $580,000 transit subsidy in 2021 to $705,000 in 2022, $762,000 in 2023. Then it jumps up to the $1,470,000, and then $1.5 million in 2025. That's when it's going to be starting to cut into our general fund balance, and we will fall below that minimum of 17%. This forecast, up in the corner, got a little gray shaded box, has got some assumptions in it. They're pretty general. They're not line item specific. The revenue increase for all line items is, for most line items, is the 1.27%. There is a 2% salary increase and a 4% health insurance increase included in the personnel services lines. And then for the most part, the other line items in the expense category are an increase of about 2%. The kind of purple and blue shaded line in the middle of the page are for those capital purchases, our vehicle and equipment purchases, and our building and infrastructure. And those are estimates from a master plan in the 2022, the 2023, 2024, and 2025 budgeted amounts are based on those estimates. So it does have in there the projections for fully funding those needed items in those out years. And with that, I'll open it up for any questions you may have.
Any questions at all? Were you going to go over the rest of the pages in this package?
The only thing that I was going to point out is the next page is the same exact model, except that it does not have the projected variance, the unexpended amount in there. So the 4% that's built into that first page is about 1.3 to 1.4, and once we get to 2025 is a little over 1.5 million. So that next sheet basically does not have that in there, and the fund balance, unassigned, unrestricted fund balance, then the projection is in the negative by 2025. The other sheets are individual for the airport, for the parking fund, the transit fund, and the wastewater fund, if you have any interest in going over those. But for the most part, the the emphasis is on the general fund 5-year forecast.
Because those other funds are what are called enterprise funds, correct?
Correct.
For folks who are either new to the process or new to the council, could you just give us a 1 or 2 minute summary on why those funds are a little bit different?
So, for example, the airport in transit, we talked about the amount that the general fund has subsidized those. We do have a specific fund for the airport in transit, but because we want to support them and we don't want to reduce services or expenditures in those areas, the general fund does subsidize, so whatever the revenues are lacking for those expenditures, the general fund subsidize. Now for parking, it is self-sustaining and the balance is growing, and that is because we do know that in the future we're going to need a new parking garage, and so the money that's in that parking fund will be used for that purpose. The main point is you cannot use the fund-specific enterprise fund balances to fund general fund items, but you can use general fund to subsidize these enterprise funds. And then the wastewater fund is the last one, and once again, that revenues are set to be able to maintain the system and pay our debt service on those bonds, wastewater bonds that we have.
So it is most likely that most of the action that will happen here during our process will involve the general fund budget, which is roughly half of the total amount that will be spent.
That is correct.
And we're at this point looking at about a 0.25% of negative revenue growth.
That is correct.
It is challenging. Any questions or comments? Councilmember Hussey?
Just one question about the CARES money for transit. Have we received that in full? That $2 million or whatever?
2.3 million. It is on a reimbursement basis.
Okay. And are we obligated to spread it over 3 years, or we just have the option to? Okay.
It does. It has very few rules about how it's to be spent.
Okay. So do we have to spend those dollars first and then be reimbursed out
Correct.
of general revenue? Okay. So it's really just a cash flow issue, but we're okay with. I guess my question is, waiting on the federal government to reimburse us $600 and something thousand. Is that a monthly reimbursement or an annual reimbursement?
It could be as often as monthly.
Okay. And so, but in theory, the council could choose to not stretch that over 3 years and do something different. I'm not saying that that's a wise course of action, but it's within our, if for some reason we wanted to do 750 this year or 800 and free up some dollars with the hope that long-term.
Yeah. How it works, am I okay with that microphone?
No, this is recorded though, Matt.
So, transit not only gets that grant, but they get the regular operating grant that we use. So first, we keep that grant, and so we have to match that one. So our first, in round numbers, $1.5 million is that grant and our money we spend. And in round numbers, the budget for transit, I don't have it in front of me, 2.56 million, somewhere there. And so then part of that is we get revenue in transit too. I mean, the fares and stuff, so we can't seek reimbursement for that little piece of it. So anyway, you do all the math and gyrations here, and you end up with about 600,000 to 700,000 ish that you can get the reimbursement for per year. Now you could throw in some capital, but we're trying to focus on operating right now because we have some other grants that help us with capital. So it's heavily on grants. So what we found was about that sweet spot that Margie mentioned, that amount that we're trying to get that would be the sweet spot. And then, so in other words, you do the math, you spread it out about 3 years. Is that clear as mud as far as transit goes?
Thank you very much, Mr. Kroll.
Part of the decision-making process was also try to keep that level over that period of time. But I'd also point out in the mayor's memo, the highlighted, yellow highlighted portion is what we're really talking about. And this is really a one-time infusion. And so, we certainly want to use caution in talking about an ongoing expenditure. And so we've used that for the operating portion of that transit.
All right, thank you very much. And Ms. Mueller, thank you so much for your presentations tonight, and also Mayor Turgeon, thank you again for presenting this evening. It's not on the agenda, but we have a few minutes left in our scheduled time if we want to open it up for any council discussion or comments or questions on what's been presented so far this evening. Not everybody all at once. Just to let everyone know, the next meeting of this committee will be Thursday, August 6th. So that's next Thursday, next week, at 5:30 p.m. That will be a virtual meeting, so we'll be meeting by WebEx. And I assume that'll also be streamed on the city's Facebook page, like our other virtual meetings have been. And we will be meeting in that manner for at least 2 or 3 meetings while we hear departmental budget presentations. Look forward to that. If Councilwoman Wiseman is still on the phone, it might be time for her motion. The floor is yours, Councilwoman Wiseman. It's been a motion and a second to adjourn, and we stand adjourned. Thank you so much. Thank you.